Welcome to the Debrief. I'm Diane Macedo, and it is Election Day, people. We are going to take a look at some of the hotly contested races going on across the country, as well as what the president has to say about it all. But first, here are your headlines.
Thousands of migrants, many hoping to eventually get to the U.S., now made it to Mexico City. Officials are letting them camp in tents set up in a sports stadium.
The U.S. Olympic Committee revoking USA Gymnastics status as the governing body of the sport in the wake of the Larry Nassar sexual assault case.
Autumn time severe weather near Nashville. A suspected tornado hit a home in Christiana, Tennessee. One person inside was killed.
No comment from Amazon amid reports the company's plans for a new headquarters may be changing. There's talk the so-called HQ2 may be split, with facilities put into two different places.
And an Iowa grandmother is now one of the richest people in the country. Loren West has come forward, and she's claimed her share of last month's big Powerball jackpot.
She's already set up a foundation named after her grandson she lost as an infant.
The Callum Foundation is set up in honor of a grandson of mine who was born in April, and he was born at 24 weeks, and he lived for one day. And so that foundation is to honor him and to do good for others.
Her ticket worth just under $350 million. Aretha Franklin's estate says Amazing Grace, Franklin's 1972 gospel concert film, will premiere November 12th.
I'm Idris Elba, and I am the sexiest man alive.
People magazine has named British actor Idris Elba its sexiest man alive for 2018.
I was kind of hoping we could just keep playing the video of Idris Elba over and over again. But I guess we should get to the 2018 midterm elections because they are finally here. Early voting has already broken records, and while it is members of Congress on the ballot as well as governors, President Trump has made it clear this election is also very much about him. Karen Travers is outside the White House with the latest on that. And Karen, how crucial are these results to the White House?
This is a big deal for President Trump. A Democratic takeover in the House, Diane, would have big consequences for his agenda in 2019 and 2020. It would also likely increase the scrutiny on his cabinet, and it could impact the Russia investigation. So, of course, the president leaving nothing on the field. He had an incredibly aggressive blitz over the past couple of weeks. This year, Diane, 44 rallies, 22 states. 30 of those events have been held just since the beginning of September. But the president yesterday finishing up with 3 states. Today, he is not going to have any public events. We're not going to see him here at the White House. He's already made that closing argument. And yesterday, he was asked, looking back, if there was anything maybe he regrets, anything he would change. He had an interesting answer.
I would say tone. I would like to have a much softer tone. I feel to a certain extent I have no choice. But maybe I do, and maybe I could have been softer from that standpoint.
Well, he certainly didn't change that tone on the campaign trail yesterday in Ohio, Indiana, and Missouri. But the president, you heard him there say, Diane, that he had to do that because the president's message over the past few weeks has been aimed at revving up Republican voters in red states, states he won where Democrats are defending Senate races. And the president himself acknowledged he's had the most impact in those races. He hasn't been able to go and campaign for some of those critical Republican members of Congress in the suburban districts where the House control will be won or lost.
All right. Well, Karen, we'll find out soon enough if that strategy worked. Karen Travers from the White House. We appreciate it as always, Karen. Thanks. And as we mentioned, the early voter turnout is already a record. This could be the first time in midterm elections we see 100 million American voters. Mary Alice Parks is here to help us with some analysis. Mary Alice, some are calling this the most important midterm election in a generation.
Absolutely. It's going to be the first nationwide vote in the president's era, sort of a referendum on his administration. And we know that enthusiasm is through the roof. There are already 3 states where total voting has surpassed before Election Day total vote from 4 years ago. There are 30 states where early vote was nearly double what it was from 4 years ago. So clearly people are excited to get out there and vote. We are tracking over 100 House races around the country, mostly ones where Democrats are on offense. Yes, there's a lot of those suburban districts, but if Democrats are going to have a good night, they're really going to have to outperform Republicans in the suburbs, but also in the Rust Belt, the Midwest, farm country. They're trying to play all across the country.
And nearly every seat of the House is up for grabs.
Every single one.
A third of the Senate as well, which could totally affect, obviously, the majority and minority that's held there.
Absolutely. So in the House, every single congressional district up for election today, Democrats would have to net 23 seats. That's a number you're going to keep hearing all night, all day, all night into the wee hours. They would have to net 23 seats to take control of the House. But in the Senate, Democrats would have to net 2. They'd have to pick up 2 Democratic senators to flip control of the Senate. That's a much more of an uphill battle for them. There's only 35 senators that are up for re-election, and 10 of those senators are Democrats defending in very red states.
Right, and we know the president sort of focused more of his efforts on trying to protect the Senate rather than going after the House. So right now, it seems the best hopes, if the Democrats want to regain control, is to do it in the House rather than the Senate.
Absolutely. And Republicans at this point are sort of bracing for that. You get a sense that they are starting to put their ducks in a row to prepare for the possible flip of the majority in the House. But we have to say, we still don't know.
It's still not a guarantee.
Absolutely not.
All right, well, will be interesting to see how this all plays out. And of course, without one house, you don't do much without the other. So they'll need both branches if either party wants to get a whole lot done. But we want to get to some of those key battleground states now. Florida is one of the most closely watched because things have gotten fairly heated there, not only for the House and Senate, but also for the governor race. Whit Johnson is in Tallahassee with the latest on that. Whit, let's start with the governor's race. It doesn't get much closer than this.
Absolutely, Diane, and really, it wouldn't be a major election without drama happening in Florida, and that's what we're seeing play out. We are outside one of the polling locations here. This is a Catholic church. Polls open at 7 a.m. There's been a steady stream of people going in to cast their ballots, including the Democrat running for governor, Mayor Andrew Gillum. He was here with his wife, with his children, casting a vote for himself. About the same time, his Republican opponent, Ron DeSantis, was casting his ballot south of Jacksonville, Florida this morning. Let's talk about the candidates here. The Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gillum was really an underdog in the primary, not expected to win, but he got huge support from millions of dollars coming in from outside donors. He was endorsed early on by Bernie Sanders, a true progressive. And then you've had Barack Obama, the former president. You've had Hillary Clinton in this state campaigning for Andrew Gillum. On the Republican side, Ron DeSantis, practically handpicked by President Donald Trump. He is all in on the Trump agenda. He's a congressman who actually resigned his seat so that he could focus on this race. There was even an early campaign ad showing DeSantis building the Trump wall with toy blocks with his daughter. Now, this has been an ugly battle from the start, though. Allegations of racism hurled toward DeSantis, accusations of corruption directed at Gillum. It's been back and forth, and in some ways both candidates acknowledge that the ugliness has in some ways overshadowed the real issues that matter to people here in Florida, like health care, like immigration, like the environment and the issues with the toxic algae here, the economy, and much more. Let's go ahead and listen to both candidates this morning making their final plea to voters.
Well, I mean, us winning tonight, I think, will send a message to Mr. Trump and Mr. DeSantis as well, that the politics of hatred and of division, of separation, that they've come to an end. At least in this election, that's what we're going to show, that people are going out and they're voting for something and not against. We've really, at every turn, in spite of all the distractions, have tried to keep voters in this state focused on what matters. I believe that that is what is going to allow us to walk away with a win today.
Andrew's agenda of massive tax increases, probably ridiculous bureaucracy, red tape, all these different things, working against law enforcement, you name it, that is going to do damage to this state. That is going to affect families' lives at their kitchen table on an everyday basis. And so this one really does matter.
You know, one thing that is interesting talking to the voters here, President Trump's name may not be on the ballot in Florida, but you wouldn't know it. If you talk to the voters, they are very much casting a vote to either support and promote or reject the Trump agenda. You talked about early voting. Quickly want to give you some numbers already coming in. 5.2 million people in Florida have already voted early, either absentee votes or voting in person. That is a record. If you break it down Republican and Democrat, it's almost split, with Democrats just having the slightest edge. The Democratic candidates also having a slight edge in the polls, but it is all about turnout. Anything can happen in the state of Florida, Diane.
And I want to bring in Mary Alice Parks here. Mary Alice, how surprised are you to see that breakdown?
You know, we're going to be watching those numbers in the southern part of the state, especially the Miami area, where Andrew Gillum is really hoping to sort of expand the electorate and get new voters who maybe haven't voted in the past, but who tend to tilt to the Democratic Party out in big numbers. And there are a number of very key congressional races in southern Florida and the Miami area where Democrats are hoping to flip them on Republicans.
And Whit, on that note, sort of break it down for us, what's going on there in terms of those congressional seats.
Exactly. Well, what's interesting about the congressional seats, you have some of these seats that were held by longtime Republicans, but Hillary Clinton won those districts by double digits in some places. Two of the most competitive districts, she won by 15 points. Another one she won by 20 points. The Republican in one is retiring, and so that's become a competitive race. Also, aside from the House races, you have this huge Senate race that's going on here. The longtime senator, three-term Senator Bill Nelson, who was also a congressman, he was a state lawmaker, one of the first members of Congress to fly in space. He's a household name here in Florida in the fight for his career up against Florida Republican Governor Rick Scott, who's had a frosty, hot and cold relationship with Donald Trump. He's been one of the early supporters, and he was endorsed by President Trump, but also in recent months has distanced himself on some key issues, on immigration, the separation of families, also on other things like gun control following the Parkland shooting. Rick Scott was front and center taking on the NRA, trying to make some changes here, but still the President Trump, knowing how important Florida is, continued to maintain his support for Rick Scott. And just some perspective here, this is the state of 1%. In 2016, President Trump beat Hillary Clinton by about 1%. In 2012, President Obama beat Mitt Romney by about 1%. The last two governor's races, 2010, 2014, Rick Scott won both of those by just about 1%. So when we say turnout is everything, it sounds like a cliche, but nowhere else is it more important in the crucial swing state than Florida.
All right, Florida keeping us in suspense as always. Whit Johnson there. We appreciate it, Whit. Thanks. And one of the most hotly, let's see, how should we say it? I guess nasty races is probably the best way to describe it, is taking place in Georgia. We have seen racist robocalls, questions about voting security, accusations on both sides of the aisle, and Steve Osunsami is just outside Atlanta with the latest on that. Steve, what's the latest on these election hacking allegations? That seemed to be the last part of this soap opera.
Well, on Saturday, the Secretary of State, Brian Kemp, who is also the Republican candidate for governor, accused the Democratic Party of hacking into state voter rolls. He then said that he alerted the FBI and has asked the FBI to investigate these. We tried getting some confirmation from the FBI as to whether they're looking into this matter, and so far they have no comment on the issue. The president appeared with Brian Kemp at a rally a day later, and neither of the two mentioned this. Kemp says that he is just doing his job. There is a long, deep into the weeds story about how all this happened. Democrats are saying that this is absolutely false, 100% made up, and is a distraction meant to gin up a support for Brian Kemp on his side of the aisle.
And Steve, I know there's also been lots of talk about voter suppression. Are officials sort of taking any effort to try to ensure that every vote is counted?
So what's happening is that the Democratic Party has set up a hotline for people to call if they have issues, and there are many issues happening today. We're hearing about something in Gwinnett County, north of where I am right now, about machines not working and so on and so forth. But on the other side, there is also the concern about voter fraud. That's what you're going to hear conservatives and Republicans talk about, especially if Stacey Abrams, the Democratic nominee, wins tonight. They're concerned about voter fraud. They, too, have set up a hotline to the Secretary of State's office. I want to talk about those robocalls that you mentioned, though, about how ugly this race has become. So of all of the people to visit and campaign for Stacey Abrams, and I'm talking about President Obama, U.S. senators, no one got more attention on both sides than Oprah Winfrey. Her visit here added gas to the fire and really upset many people on the right, and then also caused a group to put out these racist robocalls that described her as Aunt Jemima, and we have her response to that right now.
Jesus don't like ugly, and we know what to do about that. Vote. Tomorrow, show up and show out, and vote.
A lot of people, of course, have been heeding her message. I have with me now, Diane, I want to introduce to you two young women who I'm just meeting right now. Come on in. They are two young voters, and I'm understanding this is the first time you two have voted?
Yes, it is.
What are your names?
Grace.
And your name?
Claire.
Claire? So tell me about how big was it busy in there?
No, actually, it was really quick to get through. We were surprised.
Now, you're both in high school, is that right?
Yeah, seniors at Decatur High School.
Seniors so when did you register to vote?
I registered about 2 months ago, so yeah.
So what do you think about the race? Who are you here voting for, if you're willing to say?
I'd rather not say who I'm voting for. I'd rather not say that, but I will say that we did a lot of research up on the candidates, and it was hard to find like an unbiased source, particularly in this race, but we did as much research as we could.
What do you think about the ugliness of the race? Have you seen some of these commercials?
Yes, I have. And I don't know, I feel like it's very much just trying to get, there's a lot of just trying to get support, and I don't know how much truth is behind all of them. I don't know. It's very difficult to find information that I feel like is
just facts.
Right.
Just facts. Yeah.
And tonight, you guys know that if no one gets up to 50% tonight, there's a runoff. Will you vote in the runoff?
Yeah.
I would like to vote in the runoff. Yeah.
What's your message to people across the country who are watching this right now about this race, and in particular the governor's race?
Well, I would say I think it's very important to vote. I think that it's kind of a civic duty. You don't have to, but I'm very excited that I got to vote this year because I feel like I can contribute to my country, and it's a right that I'm very proud of.
It definitely feels good to finally have my opinion out there for the country and to represent part of it. So it feels good.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yes.
It's a pleasure to see you here. I'm very warmed in my heart to see young people voting. Thank you. It's a pleasure meeting you. It's a pleasure meeting you too. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, two young voters who are voting. We have seen long lines across town. I have friends across the city who've been sending me pictures of very long lines at high schools, at churches, people who you thought would have voted early but waited until today to vote. The early voting numbers were incredible in the state of Georgia, all-time record numbers, and we're seeing what could be a record turnout today as well. Diane.
That does seem to be the common theme, Steve, and I want to bring in Mary Alice on this as well, because Stacey Abrams has launched kind of a very different campaign than the traditional Democrat. Her election could be historic as the first African-American woman governor, but also just the way she's campaigning. What could the results of this race mean for her message, and what does that do for the party?
It could mean we have an entirely new Democratic Party. Over the last 2 years, the party has really tried to rebuild itself. And Stacey Abrams is sort of testing a theory about how Democrats run in the South. She has been open about her support for gun safety reforms, an assault weapons ban. She's talking about student loan debt and expanding health care access, trying to register new young voters and voters that aren't white in the South, and not necessarily working towards the middle like we've seen Democrats in the past. So if she were to win, not only would it be so historic for the country, but it would really set a new tone for the Democratic Party.
All right, really interesting. And the other big race, Pennsylvania. Democrats are hoping to pick up several House seats, even though that state went to Donald Trump in 2016. And that's thanks to a few changes that are underway. Eva Pilgrim is in Philadelphia with a look at that. Eva?
Hey, Diane, we are here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania at the Gold Standard Cafe. It's one of the polling sites. You can see there is a line. It actually stretches all the way back into the cafe. There are 3 machines. The line's moving pretty quickly. Philadelphia has some interesting polling sites. We've seen yoga studios, the Mummers Museum, auto body shops, people's personal garages. It's really interesting to see some of the different locations that they set up these polling sites. But as you can see, people are turning out to make sure that they're able to vote today. Now, Pennsylvania will play a big role in the night. It's an indicator state. Democrats have a chance to pick up 6 House seats here in the Keystone State. A large reason for that is because of the brand new redistricting map in Pennsylvania, and that is really going to play out tonight as we see how many of these districts switch. There's some competitive races that we are watching. Democratic Party, we spoke with some of their representatives. They told us they actively recruited people to run in these districts. They were looking for people who were local from these areas, moderate people. They have a lot of veterans and women running. So we could see some very interesting races shaping up tonight as those numbers start to come in. And of course, how many seats the Democrats are able to pick up here in Pennsylvania will greatly sort of affect and sort of shape the night as it progresses on. And we, of course, will be following all of this as the night happens. Diane?
All right, Eva Pilgrim from Philadelphia. We appreciate it, Eva. And Mary Alice, you know, one thing that Eva mentioned was the redistricting. I know Democrats are feeling a bit more confident about that. How big of an impact do you think that'll have?
That new map in Pennsylvania was a huge gift to Democrats this year. The court weighed in and said the map is unfair. They tried to draw a new map to make people feel more represented in their own areas. The old map was like this weird spider web, and now it's pretty simple.
Okay.
And that new map alone is probably going to give Democrats 3 pickups. And so she's exactly right. Eva just said it perfectly there. It will really set a tone for the whole night, that one state. Democrats could pick up 3 or as many as 6 seats in Pennsylvania alone if they're having a good night.
All right. And from the districts to another barrier for some voters, the weather. In some areas, we have had deadly weather hit the south overnight. Those storms are now moving east, and Rob Marciano has the latest on that. Rob, I know the area that you're in Tennessee was especially hard hit.
Yeah, we're in Christiana, which is southeast of Nashville and Rutherford County, which got slammed last night with a series of storms, one of which believed to be a tornado that touched down in this town of Christiana, not far from here. And emergency responders, take a look at this, shortly after midnight had to converge on one house that was completely destroyed, and sadly a woman in that house lost her life. There was also another 2 people that were in a different home that were seriously injured, had to be lifted off to the hospital as these storms moved through. They all started this line. This outbreak started yesterday afternoon in central Louisiana, where a significant tornado touched down there in Natchitoches Parish, doing some damage, but thankfully not doing any injuries. There was also damage in Tupelo, Mississippi. But you can see the line of storms quickly moving towards the east. And this afternoon and evening, the crux of it's going to be right on the coastline. So between now and then, we'll see some storms across the Carolinas, southern Georgia, and then the most significant or severe probably going up through the Delmarva, maybe even through D.C. late in the day. So not the best of weather on the East Coast. Back here in Christiana, this home behind me, this is not tornado damage. This is actually fire damage that the fire department tells me was spawned by a lightning strike around midnight last night. And some of the neighbors that I've talked to describe the heroics of the man inside here, because he had his 3 young kids, one of which in diapers, that he had to pull out of this house into his car and get him out of here before you see all that damage was done to the bedrooms up there. So all sorts of action, unfortunately, here in this part of Tennessee, Macedo. A pretty horrific night, but as you can see, the sun is out, and these storms have, for the most part, moved on.
All right, well, good to see that it's at least gotten better, but that is definitely the kind of action we don't want to see, Rob. And I'm just wondering, do you see any other problem areas in some of these key voting states?
Well, for one thing, here in Tennessee, I spoke with the coordinator of elections here, and there are a few polling stations that are without power. They have contingencies for that, and they have implemented those. There's one polling station at last check in Knox County that has had to use emergency ballots, as they call them, which are basically paper ballots. But he's told me that it shouldn't be an issue as far as significantly delaying those results. Over 1 million people here in Tennessee, like other states, have voted early before these storms even came in. There are some trees down in some spots that may hamper people getting out at least early. But aside from that, shouldn't be a problem here. In Georgia, you heard Steve talking about the early voting there. They had some storms early in the day, but those storms are quickly moving out. But I think that is a hotly contested governor race that may be impacted a little bit by weather, at least early on in the southern part of that state. Virginia as well, seeing some storms now, some rain. That's not the best voting weather. New Jersey also a pretty hot state, and they're dealing with rain and thunderstorms there as well. North Dakota, a little bit of slick spots as far as some cold air and some snow up there. But much of the West is seeing dry conditions and tranquil conditions and good day to get out. But the East, it's certainly not the best of voting weather, that's for sure. But it sounds like people are getting out, Macedo.
That's right. Get your raincoat on and get to the polls. Rob Marciano, we appreciate it, as always. And finally, I just want to wrap things up with Mary Alice. What's your sort of big takeaway we've come so long and talked about these midterms for so long? What do you think now that we're finally here?
There's no way that tonight isn't historic in some way. We've seen a historic number of non-white candidates on the ballot, a historic, record-shattering number of female candidates on the ballot at every single level, from governor to the House to state and local races. And so no matter what happens tonight, there's going to be boundaries broken, records shattered, a whole new era of representation. I was thinking about Pennsylvania. We were talking about that with Eva. Pennsylvania has never had a woman represent them in Washington, ever, which is amazing. And no matter what happens tonight, because there's one race where there's two women running against each other, no matter what happens, Pennsylvania will have their first female representative in Washington.
All right, we will see history made tonight one way or the other.
That's right.
Mary Alice Parks, we appreciate it. Thanks for hanging out with us. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget, our election coverage starts right here on ABC News Live at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We will break it all down for you. All your midterm election coverage that you need to know. So good luck, everybody, getting out there and voting, whether you need a raincoat or not. And remember, you can check your headlines all day long at abcnews.com or at your ABC News app. For ABC News Live, I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for watching, everyone. Great voting.